At my daughter's wedding, the groom accidentally spilled wine all over me. When he found out who paid for the entire reception, his smile froze. What I never imagined was that red wine stain on my champagne-colored dress would only be the beginning of the most painful humiliation of my 67 years. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if, for a second, this resonates with you, I only ask that you give this video a like and subscribe. It will help me keep letting things out. It was a Saturday morning in Boston when my phone rang. Charlotte's number appeared on the screen, and as always, my heart raced with that mixture of hope and dread that only mothers know. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, not since the argument about the wedding budget, where she told me, with that frigid coldness she'd learned from her father, that I always made a mountain out of a molehill. "Mom," her voice was tense, almost annoyed. "I'm just calling to confirm the wedding is next Saturday at 5. Trinity Church in Back Bay, you know the one. And please don't be late, like you always are." There was no good morning, no, "How are you, Mom?" Just orders wrapped in reproach. I stood silent, holding the phone with lightly trembling fingers, looking out the window of my small, rent-controlled apartment in the South End, where I had to move after selling the family home to finance her medical degree. "And, do you need help with anything else?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "No, everything is controlled. You just come dressed nicely and don't make a scene, like you always do." She hung up. I stood there, in my kitchen with its cracked butter-yellow tiles, holding a mute phone as my coffee went cold in my hands. "Like you always do." Those 4 words speared my chest like splinters. When had I ever made a scene? When had I ever been the problem? When I had sacrificed everything, absolutely everything, for her and her brother, Ethan? I remember when Charlotte was 8 and asked me to tell her stories before bed. "Tell me the one about the princess who saved her family, Mommy," she would say, snuggling against my chest. I invented stories where mothers were heroines, where family love was a treasure more valuable than all the dollars in the world. How ironic that metaphor became years later. The irony is that I had been that princess who saved her family. When Richard, their father, abandoned us for a 26-year-old secretary named Brenda, I was 42 with 2 children to support. Charlotte was starting high school, and Ethan was barely 12. The assets we had built together, the house in Wellesley Hills, the stocks we'd bought with such effort, the returns on our investments, evaporated in the divorce because Richard's lawyer was better than mine. I was left with a miserable alimony payment and the responsibility of 2 teenagers who didn't understand why Dad no longer lived with us, but who understood perfectly that they still wanted the same life as before. The same private school, the same piano lessons for Charlotte, the same sports club for Ethan. I sold my inheritance, the small scenic cottage on the Cape that my grandfather had left me, with its pine trees and ocean view, the one thing I had sworn never to touch. I got enough capital to keep our lives afloat through both their university years. Charlotte went to UMass Medical School. Ethan graduated with an engineering degree. I paid for everything. Tuition, books, expenses, even the vacations in Cancun they deemed necessary for their mental health. They never said thank you. They never asked how I managed. They never noticed that I wore the same clothes for years, that I only bought essentials on my Target runs, that I had traded my former European vacations for staying home watching old movies and gentle TV dramas. The week before the wedding, Charlotte came to my apartment, not to visit, to ask for money, again. "Mom, I need you to help with the final bills. Brandon and I want this to be an elegant wedding, not some backyard BBQ wedding like your generation had." I told her directly. I had barely $200,000 left in my savings account. It was everything I had. My emergency fund, my earnings accumulated from years of doing tax prep for small local businesses in the South End. "Then use it," she replied without blinking. "She's your only daughter, Mom. Other mothers sell their wedding rings for their daughter's wedding. And I did it. I transferred all my liquid assets to her account that same afternoon. $200,000 that represented my security, my peace of mind, my dignified retirement. All for a 4-hour banquet where, as I later learned, I hadn't even been assigned a decent table. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early at Trinity Church in Back Bay. I wore my champagne-colored dress, the only elegant one I owned, altered by Mrs. Carmen, the seamstress in my building, because I had lost weight from the nerves and financial worries of the past months. I had styled my hair at a cheap salon on the corner, done my own nails, and even bought a small bouquet of flowers at the market so as not to arrive empty-handed at the reception hall. But when I arrived at the Fairmont Copley Plaza Ballroom, where the reception was held, my name wasn't on any list. The coordinator, a woman in her 40s with designer glasses and a professional smile, checked and rechecked. "Ma'am, what was your name again?" "Evelyn Miller. I'm the mother of the bride." "Ah, yes, here it is. Table 18. Table 18 was at the back of the room, next to the kitchen doors, where the noise of dishes and the movement of the staff made it impossible to hear the music or the speeches. I shared the space with two waiters taking turns resting, and a distant cousin of Brandon's who also wasn't sure why he was there. From my spot, I watched the head table where Charlotte radiated in her $15,000 dress, which I had also paid for, next to Brandon and his parents. His parents, who had contributed exactly $0 to the event, but who were receiving hugs and recognition as if they had personally organized everything. I watched my daughter, so beautiful with her hair swept up in a sophisticated bun, her pearl earrings that had been my mother's, her radiant smile directed at everyone, except me. Not a glance, not a gesture. As if I were part of the ballroom furniture, as invisible as the centerpieces I had paid for. It was during the first toast that Brandon approached my table. He held a glass of red wine in his hand and wore that smile I had learned to distrust since the day Charlotte introduced him. A smile that never reached his eyes, like those salesmen who promise huge returns on investments you know are risky. "Mrs. Miller," he said, leaning slightly toward me with that forced courtesy young people use when they need something from their elders. "Thank you so much for coming, and for everything." He extended the glass toward me, as if it were a gesture of reconciliation. I, naively, thought he was finally acknowledging me, that perhaps Charlotte had told him what this reception had cost. I reached out to take the glass, a shy smile appearing unbidden on my lips. But just as my fingers brushed the crystal, Brandon tripped. The red wine spilled directly onto my chest, soaking the champagne silk of my dress, staining my neckline, dripping down my skirt to form a dark puddle on my patent leather shoes that I had shined that very morning with such care. "Oh, my bad! How clumsy of me!" he exclaimed with a nervous laugh that sounded too rehearsed. "Well, what the heck, Mrs. Miller? Don't worry about it. It's not like the dress was new anyway, right?" He laughed, loudly, as if he had told a very funny joke. Someone else laughed from a nearby table. A cousin of Charlotte's who had always looked at me with disdain, as if my presence reminded them that they came from humbler origins than they now boasted. I looked toward the head table. Charlotte had seen everything. She was less than 10 yards away, perfectly aware of what had just happened. Our eyes met for a second, and I waited. I waited for her to stand up, to come to me, to say something, anything. But she lowered her gaze to her plate and kept eating as if she had seen nothing. That hurt more than the cold wine soaking my clothes, more than the public humiliation, more than Brandon's mocking laugh. My own daughter, the child I had held in my arms when she had a fever, whom I had defended from bullies at school, for whom I had sold my family heritage, had turned her back on me when I needed her most. I rose from the chair with all the dignity I could muster, clutching my purse to my chest to hide the stain. I walked toward the ladies' room with measured steps, feeling the stairs stab my back like silent daggers. The noise of the ballroom, the music, the conversations, the laughter, faded until it became a distant hum that seemed to come from inside my head. The restroom was elegant, with gilded mirrors and marble sinks that probably cost more than my monthly salary when I was doing bookkeeping for Don Aurelio's stores downtown. I looked at myself in the mirror under the white, unforgiving light of the fixtures. I was a mess. The wine stain had soaked through the fabric, creating an irregular map from my neck to my waist. My makeup, applied with such care that morning, had run with tears I didn't remember shedding. My hairstyle, which had cost $40 at Mrs. Rosario's salon, money I shouldn't have spent, now looked messy and sad. But the worst was my expression. It was the face of a defeated woman, of someone who had lost not only her money, but her place in the world. I looked like an intruder at my own daughter's wedding. I wet paper towels in the sink and tried to clean the stain, but only managed to spread it more. Red wine is unforgiving, like debts that pile up when you don't have enough cash to pay them all at once. It adheres and stains forever. The bathroom door opened, and one of the banquet waiters entered, a young woman in her 20s with an impeccable black uniform and an expression of genuine concern on her face. "Ma'am, the chef sent this for you," she said, extending a damp cloth and a small bottle of club soda. "He says it works better than plain water for wine stains." "The chef knows me?" I asked, surprised that anyone in this place had noticed what had happened to me. "Yes, ma'am. He says thank you for paying for all of this. That if it weren't for you, he wouldn't be working here today. And that your daughter is very lucky to have a mother like you." I felt a lump in my throat. A stranger showed me more consideration than my own family. "What is the chef's name?" I asked, as I applied the club soda to the fabric. "Chef Tony Rossi, ma'am. He's worked many weddings, but he says this one is special because he knows your story. He says you deserve respect." The young woman left, but her words kept echoing in my head. Knows your story. What story? The story of a woman who had sacrificed everything for children who treated her as if she were invisible? The story of a mother who had converted her love into a financial transaction where she always lost. I returned to the ballroom just as the thank yous began. The event coordinator, an older man in a gray suit with a microphone in hand, called the protagonists of this beautiful celebration to the front. Brandon and Charlotte stood, radiant, receiving applause from the nearly 200 guests who had come to celebrate their love. Behind them, the groom's parents, he a retired engineer, she a homemaker who had never worked, smiled as if they had been the architects of this happiness. "We want to thank," Brandon began with a clear, confident voice, "everyone who made this celebration possible. To our dearest friends and mentors, the Ramirezes, for their generosity." Applause. "To my parents, for giving me the best example of marriage that exists." More applause. The groom's parents hugged, emotional. "To Charlotte's parents, for welcoming me into their family." My heart quickened. Maybe he would mention me. Maybe the wine incident had really been an accident, and now the recognition I deserved was coming. But Brandon continued. "To Richard, Charlotte's dad, who couldn't be here because of work, but we know he's sending his blessings from Seattle. Richard, my ex-husband, the man who abandoned us and hadn't contributed a single dollar to his children's upbringing, the one who now lived a new life with Brenda and their 5-year-old twins, pretending to be an exemplary father in his second chance. And, of course," Brandon continued, "to all the people whose work and dedication made this magical night possible. The catering team, the musicians, the florists. Nothing. Not a word about me. Not even a generic mention of the bride's family. As if I hadn't mortgaged my future to pay for every detail of that magical night. I stayed seated in my uncomfortable chair, with my wine-stained dress, feeling like a ghost who had paid for her own disappearance. Applause echoed throughout the hall as Brandon and Charlotte kissed, posing for photographs they would later share on social media with hashtags about true love and the perfect family. In that moment, I understood something I had been denying for years. It wasn't that my children were ungrateful. It was that I had confused being useful with being loved. I had built my value as a mother on my ability to solve financial problems, to be the family bank, the emergency savings account. And now that my capital was depleted, I discovered that my place in their lives had also run out. After the toast, I decided to go out to the hotel garden for fresh air. The ballroom had become suffocating, filled with the smoke of discreetly smoking guests and the expensive perfume worn by Charlotte's friends, women my age, who looked at me with that mixture of pity and superiority they reserve for those they consider less fortunate. The garden was beautiful, with illuminated fountains and rose bushes that must cost a fortune to maintain. I sat on a wrought iron bench, away from the ballroom windows, and for the first time in hours, I could hear my own thoughts without the constant noise of music and other people's conversations. It was then I saw something that chilled my blood. Behind a column, partially hidden by the ornamental plants, were Brandon and a young woman I didn't recognize. She wore a navy blue dress and her hair down, and she couldn't have been more than 25. Her hands were on his chest, and her lips, my God, her lips were dangerously close to my new son-in-law's. It wasn't a family greeting. It wasn't a casual conversation between relatives. It was an intimacy that shouldn't exist 10 feet from where his wife was celebrating the most important day of her life. I took out my phone with trembling hands and snapped a picture. Not for revenge, not for blackmail. I did it because, in that moment, I understood my daughter had married a liar, and someone had to protect her, even if she herself had pushed me out of her life. When I returned to the ballroom, the guests were dancing. The floor was crowded with couples moving to the rhythm of romantic ballads while waiters served dessert and more glasses of wine. The same wine that stained my dress, and now seemed a symbol of everything rotten in that celebration. I headed toward the restroom again, but in the hallway, I heard familiar voices. Charlotte was talking to one of her college friends, a doctor named Patricia who had always been particularly arrogant toward me. "It's just that my mom is a problem," Charlotte was saying in that voice she used when she thought no one important was listening. "She's always been so dramatic, so intense. Today, she showed up acting like she was the protagonist of the event." I froze, hiding behind a decorative column. "But she paid for the wedding, didn't she?" Patricia asked curiously. "Yes, but that doesn't give her the right to control everything. Imagine she wanted to weigh in on the decor, the menu, the guest list. I had to tell her no, or this would have looked like a Sweet 16 at a community hall." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. A Sweet 16 at a community hall. Those words came from the mouth of the girl who had grown up in an average neighborhood, who had learned to do her homework at the kitchen table while I ironed other people's clothes to earn extra money. "That's why we didn't mention her in the thank yous," Charlotte continued. "I wanted it to be an elegant night, not a family drama. I'm already embarrassed enough that she came in that stained dress." Patricia laughed cruelly. "Oh, I saw her. Poor thing. You can tell it's been a long time since she's been to events like this." "Exactly. That's why Brandon and I decided it's best to keep a distance. She lives in her world of gentle TV dramas and heroic sacrifices. We have to think about our future, about building something solid. Something solid. With my severance money, with my last savings, with the assets I had accumulated by selling my grandfather's coastal property." "So what are you going to do with her now?" Patricia asked. "Nothing. She can settle for coming to family gatherings when we invite her. But no more starring roles. No more drama. Brandon says that as long as she thinks she can manipulate us with money, she'll never understand her place. Her place. As if I were a domestic employee who had forgotten her boundaries. I returned to my table with legs that barely supported me. Dessert was served, a 3-tiered cake that cost more than my monthly rent. But I couldn't taste it. My throat was closed by emotion, and my stomach was churning with betrayal. I watched my daughter from a distance. She danced with Brandon, radiant, oblivious that her husband had been kissing another woman in the garden 30 minutes earlier. Oblivious that I had heard every cruel word she had said about me. Oblivious that the woman who had sacrificed everything for her happiness was sitting 10 yards away, feeling like an intruder in her own family. Ethan, my son, approached my table when the music shifted to something faster. He was wearing the new suit I had also paid for. $1,500 I put on my credit card because he insisted he couldn't show up looking cheap at his sister's wedding. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale," he said, but his concern sounded more like social protocol than genuine interest. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired." "Oh, good. Hey, Mom, while you're here, remember I mentioned the down payment on the condo?" The condo. Ethan had been talking for 6 months about a condo in the North End he wanted to buy with his girlfriend, a place that cost $800,000 and for which he needed a down payment of $40,000. "Ethan, we talked about this. I don't have that money. But Mom, it's an investment. With the profits from the consulting business I'm starting, I can pay you back with interest. It's like putting your money to work, but helping me out." His consulting business, the same one that had been about to start for the last 2 years, while he lived in my house rent-free and ate from my refrigerator without contributing $1 to expenses. "Ethan, honey, I literally don't have that money. I gave everything I had to your sister for the wedding." His expression immediately changed. The mask of filial concern disappeared, replaced by barely contained irritation. Everything? You seriously gave her all your money for a party? It's not just a party, Ethan. It's your sister's wedding. Mom, you've always favored Charlotte. Since we were kids. You pay for her med school, you pay for her wedding, you pay for everything. And you tell me you don't have money to help me have a future. The injustice of that accusation left me speechless. I had also paid for his university, his car, his vacations, his whims for years. The difference was that Charlotte had at least finished her degree and had a job, while Ethan was still waiting for life to give him opportunities without having to work for them. Ethan, I've always tried to be fair to both of you. Fair, he laughed bitterly. Right, Mom. Very fair. Well, since you decided to spend your entire net worth on this, I hope you at least have fun. He walked away without another word, leaving me alone with my confusion and pain. In less than an hour, both my children had stabbed me in the back. Charlotte talking about me as if I were an embarrassing burden. Ethan demanding why I didn't have more money to give him. I stayed sitting there, watching couples dance, guests laugh, life continuing its joyful course while I disintegrated inside. The photographer passed by my table several times, capturing spontaneous moments of family happiness, but never included me in any shot, as if he instinctively knew I didn't belong to that narrative of success and prosperity. I thought about getting up and leaving, just grab my purse, walk out of the hotel, take a cab, and go back to my apartment. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe the stubbornness of a woman who had invested too much in a lost cause to abandon it without a fight. Or maybe it was that, deep in my heart, I was still waiting for someone to see me, for someone to notice that the woman sitting in the back, in the wine-stained dress, was the reason that celebration was possible, for someone to say, just once, "Thank you, Mom." The music changed to a slower song, and I saw some older couples approach the dance floor. Entire families hugging, posing for photos, celebrating this special moment together. It hurt to see Brandon's family, his parents, his aunts and uncles, his cousins, all integrated into a grand celebration where every member seemed to have a defined and respected place. I remained the invisible spectator, the anonymous financier of a party where I was not welcome. I decided to go to the bathroom one last time, not so much out of necessity, but out of a need to escape. But as I passed the corridor connecting the main ballroom to the services, I heard my name. This time it came from a group of women I recognized as Charlotte's colleagues from the hospital where she did her residency. "Did you see Charlotte's mom?" one of them said mockingly. "Poor thing. You can tell she's not used to these kinds of events." "Oh yeah, the one with the stained dress," another replied. "Charlotte told us she's super dramatic. Says she's always inventing problems to get attention." "And is it true she paid for the whole wedding?" a third voice asked. "Yes, but imagine the pressure she must have put on Charlotte. I'll pay for the wedding, but you have to do it my way." Typical of the controlling moms of that generation. Controlling, dramatic, problematic. Each word was a slap that my own daughter had authorized. Each criticism a distorted version of my story she had shared with her colleagues to look good in front of them. When I reached the restroom, I found an elderly woman crying discreetly in front of the mirror. She looked about 70, elegantly dressed. But with that expression of deep sadness I recognized immediately, because I had seen it in my own reflection so many times. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I asked, approaching cautiously. "Oh, excuse me." She quickly dried her tears. "It's just, weddings sometimes make me nostalgic. Are you related to the bride or groom?" "I'm Brandon's grandmother, Eleanor. And you?" "Evelyn Miller, Charlotte's mother." Her expression immediately changed, from sadness to something that looked like compassion. "Ah, you are the mother of the bride. Your daughter looks beautiful. And what a lovely event they organized." "Thank you," I murmured, not knowing whether to mention that I was the one who organized it, financially speaking. "You know what, Mrs. Miller?" Eleanor continued as she touched up her makeup. "I'm also a little sidelined at this celebration. It seems grandmothers don't matter much in modern weddings anymore." There was something comforting in finding another woman who also felt invisible at a family celebration. "I raised Brandon since he was 5, she confessed. "His parents worked all day, so he practically lived at my house. I taught him to tie his shoes, took him to school, cared for him when he was sick. But today, when they mentioned the family that shaped him, they only spoke of his parents. It's painful when you're not recognized, I said, feeling an immediate connection with this woman. You know what's saddest, Mrs. Miller? That we think love is shown with sacrifices, that the more you give, the more they will value you. But sometimes giving too much just gets them used to receiving without gratitude. Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. It was exactly what had been happening to me for years without my being able to put it into words. And what does one do when they realize that? I asked, genuinely interested in her answer. Well, dear, she said with a sad but wise smile, I've decided I'm going to love them just the same, but I'm going to love myself more. At 70, I learned that you can't buy affection with favors. We returned to the ballroom together, and Eleanor accompanied me to my table. It was the first gesture of genuine courtesy I received all night. We stayed there, two older women who had given much and received little recognition, watching our families celebrate without us. Look, Mrs. Miller, Eleanor said, pointing toward the head table. Do you see that girl in the blue dress talking to Brandon? It was the same woman I had seen kissing him in the garden. Yes, I see her. That's Sabrina, Brandon's cousin. She arrived a week ago from Miami for the wedding. Very affectionate, isn't she? Too affectionate, I thought. But I didn't say anything to Eleanor. Instead, I observed the interaction between Sabrina and Brandon more closely. Even from a distance, it was obvious there was more than family love between them. Their glances, their smiles, the way she touched his arm every time she laughed. And Charlotte, my poor daughter, was 6 feet away, completely oblivious to what was happening right under her nose. Eleanor, I said impulsively, do you think a mother has an obligation to protect her children even if they don't appreciate it? Oh, honey, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think you protect when you can, but you also have to respect when children decide to take their own risks. Even if you know they're going to get hurt? Even if you know they're going to get hurt. Because sometimes life has to teach them the lessons we couldn't. The night continued, and I stayed in my seat, torn between the impulse to approach Charlotte to tell her what I had seen and the certainty that she wouldn't believe me. Or worse, that she would blame me for causing drama on her special day. Around 10 o'clock, when many guests had already started saying goodbye, I saw something that finally broke my heart. Charlotte approached the table where Richard, my ex-husband, was sitting. He had apparently arrived at the wedding after all. I saw him from afar, still handsome at 58, tanned and well-dressed, likely with money from the real estate he managed in Seattle. Money he had never shared with his children when I was raising them alone. I saw Charlotte hug him with an effusiveness she hadn't shown me all night. I heard him laugh with that charming laugh that had seduced 2 women and broken 2 families. I saw him pull a small gift box from his suit pocket, probably some expensive jewelry he could afford now that he had no family obligations. For my princess, I heard him say as he handed her the box. Sorry I'm late, but the flight was delayed. You know how these airlines are. Charlotte opened the box and shrieked with excitement. It was a necklace, apparently white gold with diamonds, that sparkled even from a distance. The kind of costly, showy gift Richard had always known how to give at important moments to compensate for all the daily absences. Dad, it's gorgeous. Thank you so much. She hugged him again, and he lifted her as he had when she was a child, spinning her in the air while they both laughed. The perfect image of the loving father reuniting with his daughter on the most important day of her life. No one mentioned that the necklace probably cost less than the entire banquet I had paid for. No one remembered who had been present during the difficult years, during the illnesses, during the debts, during the existential crises of adolescence. Richard was the hero father who arrived with expensive gifts at specific moments. I was the invisible mother who had been present at every ordinary moment, financing every need, solving every problem. Is that Charlotte's dad? Eleanor asked me, having observed the same scene. Yes, that's Richard. He seems to love her very much. Yes, I lied. Very much. Because how do you explain to a stranger that Richard's love was like his financial investments? Strategic, intermittent, and always aimed at obtaining the maximum emotional benefit with the minimum real investment? I stayed seated there, watching my daughter preen with her new necklace. showing it off to her friends, posing for photos with the dad who had appeared just in time to take the credit for the perfect day I had financed with my last savings. And I understood, with a clarity that hurt me physically, that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough, that my place in the family was not that of a beloved mother, but that of a resource to be taken for granted until it ran out. After seeing the scene between Charlotte and Richard, something definitively broke inside me. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but more like when an old pipe bursts. First a small crack, then a constant leak, until finally everything floods and there is no way to repair the damage. I stood up from my chair without saying anything to Eleanor, who had started telling me anecdotes from her youth to distract us from the hostile atmosphere around us. I walked directly toward the event coordinator, a man in his 40s who had been supervising every detail of the reception with the efficiency of someone accustomed to handling multi-million-dollar celebrations. "Excuse me," I said, tapping his shoulder gently. "Could I borrow the microphone for a moment?" He looked at me confused, checking his guest list as if trying to figure out who I was and what authority I had to make that request. "Are you related to the couple?" "I am Evelyn Miller, the mother of the bride." His expression changed immediately. Of course, he knew who I was. His company had received the wire transfer from my personal account to pay for every detail of this celebration. "Of course, Mrs. Miller." "Certainly." He handed me the wireless microphone with a deference that brutally contrasted with the treatment I had received from my own family all night. A stranger showed me more respect than my own children. I returned to the center of the ballroom with the microphone in hand, feeling the conversations gradually silence as people noticed my presence. The waiters paused their tasks, the guests turned toward me with curiosity, and the band stopped playing when the leader saw someone had taken over the sound system. For the first time all night, I had everyone's attention. "Pardon the interruption," I began, and my voice sounded firmer than I expected through the loudspeakers. "I just want to say a few words." I saw Charlotte from the head table. Her face had paled, and I could read on her lips a silent, "No, please," directed at me. Brandon looked annoyed, as if a service employee had stolen the spotlight without permission. Richard smiled with that condescending expression he used when he thought he was about to witness one of my dramatic episodes. "I am Evelyn Miller, the mother of the bride," I continued, looking directly into the eyes of every important person in this story. "I was not included in the thank yous tonight, but I believe it is time to clarify a few things." The silence was total. Not even the clinking of glasses could be heard. It was I who paid for every single dollar of this event, not because I was asked with affection, but because I thought that was how a mother shows love. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the music, the bride's dress, the groom's suit, it all came from my savings, from the sale of my grandfather's coastal property, from my last $200,000. Uncomfortable murmurs began to rise among the guests. Some looked surprised, others embarrassed. "I'm not saying this to complain," I continued, maintaining a serene tone that surprised even me. "I'm saying it because for years, I confused being useful with being loved. I thought the more I gave, the more they would value me. But tonight, I learned I was wrong." Charlotte had stood up, her cheeks red with shame and anger. "I also want to say something to my son-in-law," I said, directing my gaze directly at Brandon. "An hour ago, I saw you and your cousin Sabrina in the garden kissing. I have the photo on my phone if anyone wants to see it." A gasp was heard from one of the tables. Sabrina, who was near the dance floor, went white as a sheet. Brandon shook his head violently, but his guilty expression gave him away. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding," I continued with the same calm. "I came to reclaim my dignity. I came to tell you that a mother who pays for everything is not a controlling mother. She is a mother who loves children too much, children who don't know how to value her." Charlotte began to walk toward me, and I could see the tears of humiliation in her eyes. "Stop it, Mom! Enough!" she screamed when she reached my side. "You can't just keep quiet, not even today. You always have to play the victim. You always have to ruin everything with your drama." Her words echoed through the entire hall, amplified by the sound system, because the microphone was still on and captured every cruel accusation that came out of her mouth. You're the one who ruined my childhood with your sacrifices. You're the one who made us feel guilty for every dollar you spent. And now you come to ruin my wedding because you can't stand us being happy without you. The third betrayal, the most painful, my own daughter, in front of 200 people, turning my love into my crime, my sacrifices into my mistakes, my pain into my fault. But this time, for the first time in 67 years, I didn't apologize. You're right, Charlotte, I said with a tranquility that startled me. I ruined your childhood by giving you everything you asked for. I ruined your adolescence by paying for the private university you wanted. I ruined your young adulthood by supporting you while you found a job. And now I ruined your wedding by paying for the entire thing. I handed her the microphone. But I won't be ruining your life anymore, because I won't be in it. I took a white envelope from my purse that I had prepared that morning without knowing exactly why. It contained the bank transfer receipt for the $200,000, along with copies of all the payments I had made for the wedding, the venue deposit, the catering bill, the photographer's invoice, the receipt for the flowers. This is proof that I paid for every detail of your celebration, I told Charlotte as I handed her the envelope. Consider it my wedding gift and my farewell. I turned to leave, but before taking the first step, I heard a voice coming from the back of the room. Mrs. Miller, please wait. It was Chef Tony Rossi, an older man about 60 who had been supervising the service from the kitchen. He walked up to the microphones, clearly nervous but determined. Excuse me? He asked the coordinator, who handed him the microphone, not knowing what else to do in the situation. This woman, Chef Rossi began, pointing at me, didn't just pay for this event. She is the reason many of us are working here today, with decent jobs, bringing money home. The silence was deafening. I worked for the Miller family when I was young. Mrs. Miller gave me my first opportunity in a kitchen when no one else would hire me because I had no experience. She taught me that honest work has more value than easy money. She paid for the culinary course that allowed me to get where I am today. He looked directly at Charlotte. And today, you treat her like she's nothing. As if her love is worthless, as if her sacrifices are a burden instead of a gift. There was an eternal silence. You could hear the breathing of every person in that room. Mrs. Miller, Chef Rossi continued, you will always be welcome in my kitchen, and in my home, and in the hearts of all of us who know how to recognize a woman of worth when we see her. He began to applaud. Slowly, some waiters joined in, then Eleanor, then some people from the back tables who didn't know the family details, but understood perfectly what they had just witnessed. It wasn't a generalized applause. The immediate family, Charlotte's close friends, the people who mattered in her social circle, remained silent. But it was enough. It was the first time in years someone had applauded me for who I was, not for what I could give. I walked toward the exit with my head held high, leaving behind not only a wedding, but an entire life built on the wrong premise that love was bought with sacrifices. That night, I would sleep in my bed alone, but for the first time in decades, I wouldn't feel empty. I would feel free. I left the hotel with steps that felt different, as if I had shifted the weight of my body by leaving behind decades of silent humiliation. The night air of Boston hit my face with that mix of smog and freedom known only to those who have been enclosed too long in suffocating spaces. The valet parking attendant looked at me strangely when I asked for my car. He probably expected me to leave accompanied, not alone with a wine-stained dress as evidence of a lost battle. Or a won-one, depending on how you looked at it. During the drive back to my South End apartment, for the first time in years, I didn't turn on the radio to fill the silence with news or music. I wanted to hear my own thoughts. I wanted to process what I had just done without external distractions. I had shattered the perfect facade of my daughter's wedding, publicly exposed her husband's infidelity, revealed my role as the invisible financier. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel guilty. I arrived at my building near midnight. The night doorman, Esteban, greeted me with his usual courtesy, but I noticed his eyes lingered on my stained dress. "Everything all right, Mrs. Miller?" "Everything is perfect, Esteban, for the first time in a long time." I climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment because the elevator had been broken for 2 months and the administrator said there was no budget to fix it. Each step felt like a small victory, as if I were ascending toward a new version of myself. My apartment welcomed me with its familiar scent of lavender and coffee. 2 small bedrooms, a modest living room, a built-in kitchen that had seen better days. After selling the family home in Wellesley Hills to pay for my children's college, this place had become my refuge. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I took off the stained dress with an almost ritualistic ceremony. I folded it carefully and put it in a bag. Tomorrow I would take it to Mrs. Carmen to see if the stain could be removed, but deep down, I knew it didn't matter. That dress had fulfilled its purpose. It had been a witness to my last humiliation and my first liberation. I put on the flannel robe I had bought at a consignment shop and made myself some chamomile tea. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one I had rescued from the big house, and that Charlotte always criticized for being old and ugly, and for the first time in months, I didn't check my phone to see if I had messages from my children asking for something, because I knew I would have them. The first message arrived at 12:47 a.m. It was from Ethan. "Mom, Charlotte told me what happened. Did you really have to make that scene? Now the whole family is talking about us. We'll talk tomorrow." I didn't reply. At 1:15 a.m., another message arrived, this time from a number I didn't have saved but recognized as Brandon's. "Mrs. Miller, we need to talk. What you said is very serious and could ruin my marriage. I hope we can resolve this like civilized people." Civilized people. As if he had been civilized kissing his cousin on his wedding day. I didn't reply to that either. At 2:30 a.m., now when I was already in bed but awake staring at the ceiling, the message I both expected and dreaded arrived. It was from Charlotte. "Mom, I can't believe what you did. You ruined the most important day of my life. Everyone is talking about us. Brandon's parents are furious. I don't know how we're going to face this. I need you to come over tomorrow to talk to us and apologize publicly. This cannot be left like this." I read the message 3 times. Not a word of concern about her husband's infidelity. Not a question about how I felt. Not an acknowledgement that maybe I had valid reasons for doing what I did. Just the demand that I apologize for telling the truth. This time I did reply. "Charlotte, I will not apologize for having paid for your wedding, or for having exposed that your husband is cheating on you. If that ruined your perfect day, then perhaps you need to ask yourself what kind of perfection you were celebrating." Her reply came immediately. "How can you be so selfish? This is all because of jealousy, because Dad showed up and everyone welcomed him. You've always been envious that we have a good relationship with him. Envy, jealousy, selfishness. The same words Richard had used to describe my reactions when I confronted him about his infidelity years ago. It was incredible how children could inherit not only genes, but also the emotional manipulation strategies of their parents. Charlotte, your dad could come with an expensive necklace because he never spent his money raising you. I couldn't bring ostentatious gifts because I spent my savings raising you. That is the difference. Always the same old song and dance. Always playing the martyr. I'm sick of your sacrifices and your reproaches." And there it was. The naked truth. My sacrifices had become a burden to her. My unconditional love had transformed into an annoyance. My constant presence during the difficult times had become invisible, while her father's strategic absence had been romanticized as giving them space to grow. "All right, Charlotte. There will be no more sacrifices from me. There will be no more reproaches. In fact, there will be no more anything." "What do you mean by that?" "That starting today, you will have the complete freedom you've always wanted. No more dramatic mom. No more controlling mom. No more mom who ruins things with her inconvenient love. Mom, don't be ridiculous. You're exaggerating, as always." "I'm not exaggerating, daughter. I am learning. It took me 67 years. But I finally understood that I cannot buy love with sacrifices, and that I should not beg for respect from people who do not know how to give it." The conversation ended there. Charlotte didn't reply again, probably expecting me to give in as always, to apologize, to find a way to minimize the scandal by taking all the blame. But this time, I wasn't going to yield. I stayed awake until dawn, not from anxiety, but from a strange sense of anticipation, like when you were a child the night before starting a new school year. knowing that something was going to fundamentally change in your routine. The next day, I got up early and did something I hadn't done in years. I ate breakfast slowly. I made scrambled eggs, poured myself orange juice, and toasted bread with butter. Not the quick coffee of always before rushing out to solve a problem for my children or working extra hours to generate additional income. While I ate breakfast, my phone rang repeatedly. Calls from Ethan, from Charlotte, from Brandon's number, even from Richard. I didn't answer any. At 10 in the morning, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Ethan standing in the hallway, with that expression of contained impatience he wore when things didn't go as he expected. "Mom, open up. I know you're there. We have to talk." "We have nothing to talk about, Ethan," I replied through the door. "Please, Charlotte is hysterical. She says Brandon is threatening to annul the marriage, that his parents are considering suing you for defamation. You have to fix this." Fix? As if I were a kind of family technical service that existed to solve problems created by others. "Ethan, if Brandon wants to annul the marriage, it's because he knows what I said is true. And if his parents want to sue me, let them. I have photos." "Mom, you're acting crazy. This isn't you." He was right. It wasn't me. The old Evelyn would have opened the door, would have consoled Ethan, would have called Charlotte to apologize, would have found a way to minimize the scandal by assuming all the blame. But that Evelyn had died in the Fairmont Copley Plaza ballroom, drowned in red wine and family humiliation. The new Evelyn was learning to exist for herself. "You're right, son. This isn't me. This is the woman I should have been years ago." The days continued without the desperate calls I had expected, without the emergency visits, without the pleas for forgiveness that my wounded heart secretly longed for. Instead, something worse arrived. Silence. That dense, deliberate silence that families use when they want to punish the one who dared to break the unwritten rules of their dysfunction. During the first week after the wedding, my phone barely rang. Some sporadic texts from Ethan asking if I had reflected on my behavior, as if I were a rebellious teenager who needed time to understand my mistakes. No communication from Charlotte, nothing from Richard, who had probably returned to Seattle with Brenda and their twins to continue building his new perfect life. It was in that first week of solitude that I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel empty. For years I had feared the day my children would no longer need me. I had built my identity around being indispensable to them, but now that that moment had come, I discovered that freedom weighed less than obligation. On Thursday morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in decades. I went downtown without any specific purpose. Not to resolve some banking process related to transfers to my children. Not to buy something they needed. Not to accompany someone to a medical appointment. Simply to walk and rediscover the city that had been my home all my life. I took the subway at the South Station stop and got off at Park Street. The Boston Common was exactly the same as the last time I had visited, more than 15 years ago, when I took Charlotte and Ethan to see a history exhibit that they ended up hating because they preferred to be at home playing video games. This time I went in alone, bought my ticket without asking for senior discounts that I wasn't eligible for yet, and walked through the pathways enjoying the scenery without having to explain to anyone what it meant or why it was important. For the first time in decades, my time was entirely my own. At the Museum Cafe, I ordered a latte and a blueberry muffin and sat next to a window overlooking the park. I watched young couples taking photos, tourists consulting maps, and elderly people feeding pigeons. Normal life, people following their routines without family crises, without financial dramas, without children who saw them as emotional ATMs. It was there, at that small table overlooking the Boston Common, that I made the first important decision of my new life. I was going to travel. I returned to my apartment and pulled out a suitcase from my closet that I hadn't used since my honeymoon with Richard, more than 30 years ago. It was dusty, and the corners were scuffed, but the zippers worked perfectly. I cleaned it carefully, as if preparing a family heirloom for an important ceremony. That afternoon, I went to the bank, not to make a transfer to my children's accounts, but to check my actual financial situation. After paying for Charlotte's wedding, I had exactly $8,200 left in my savings account. It wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't nothing either. With my social security and the small bookkeeping jobs I still did for some local businesses, I could afford a modest trip. The bank executive, a young man in his 30s who had helped me for years with family transfers, seemed confused when I asked for information about domestic travel packages. "Is this for your children, Mrs. Miller?" "No, young man, it's for me." "Oh," he said, as if the idea of a woman my age traveling for pleasure was completely novel. "Within the country or abroad?" "Within the country. I want to see the Grand Canyon." The Grand Canyon. A place I had heard about all my life but had never visited because there were always other priorities. The kids' tuition, medical emergencies, unexpected expenses that arise when you have a family counting on you for everything. Over the next few days, I planned my trip with the meticulousness I used to reserve for family budgets. I looked for small, clean motels, researched national park tours, and read about the hiking trails. Every detail I planned felt like a small victory over the previous version of myself. On Friday night, as I packed my clothes into the old suitcase, my apartment buzzer rang. This time, I didn't look through the peephole. Something told me I knew who it was. I opened the door and found Charlotte standing in the hallway. She was wearing casual clothes, jeans and a white top, and her eyes were puffy as if she had been crying. She didn't come with the confrontational attitude I had expected, but with something that looked like a mix of exhaustion and defeat. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Charlotte." We stood there looking at each other like two strangers who share a complicated past but not a clear present. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to close the door and keep packing for my trip, but another part, the part that had been a mother for 40 years, was still curious to hear what she had to say. "Come in." She sat on my favorite armchair, the one she had always criticized, and looked around the apartment as if seeing it for the first time. Her gaze stopped at the open suitcase on my bed, visible from the living room. "You're taking a trip?" "Yes. To the Grand Canyon. Tomorrow morning." "Alone?" "Alone." She nodded slowly, as if processing information she hadn't expected to receive. "Mom, I came to talk to you about what happened at the wedding." "Did you come to ask me to apologize?" "No," she said, and her answer surprised me. "I came to tell you that maybe you were right." There was a long silence. Charlotte wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture I remembered from when she was little and hurt herself playing at the park. "Brandon and I, we're having problems." After the wedding, Sabrina didn't go back to Miami as planned. She stayed in the city, and he's been seeing her. I felt no satisfaction hearing that confirmation, only a deep sadness for the young woman in front of me, discovering that the most important day of her life had been built on a lie. "I'm so sorry, honey." When I confronted him about what you said, he denied it at first. But then he told me he married me because I was a good option to settle down, but that Sabrina was his true love. "And what are you going to do?" "I don't know. His parents say it's normal for men to have these little flings before settling down, that I should be more understanding, that marriage is a commitment that goes beyond passion. The same narrative they had sold to me when Richard cheated. The same justification for male infidelity, as if it were a natural right that women had to tolerate for the sake of family stability. What do you think, Charlotte?" I think I married him because I was ashamed to turn 30 single, because all my friends were already married or engaged, because I thought it was what I was supposed to do." She broke down. For the first time in years, my adult daughter cried in front of me without defenses, without reproaches, without the armor of moral superiority she had built to protect herself from her own vulnerabilities. I went to her and hugged her, not because it was my obligation as a mother, but because it was what any woman would do for another woman who is discovering that her life is not what she thought it was. "Mom," she whispered while crying on my shoulder, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I said, for how I treated you, for not valuing what you did for us." It was the apology I had waited for years, but now that I had it, I realized I no longer needed it to heal. I had already learned to live without her validation. I forgive you, Charlotte, but more important than that, I forgive myself too. For what? For confusing giving too much with loving well, for believing that my value as a mother was measured in dollars and sacrifices, for having taught myself that I deserved less respect than I actually deserve. We stayed embraced in silence. Outside, the city continued its nocturnal rhythm. Passing cars, music filtering from a neighboring apartment, life running its course regardless of our personal crises. "What are you going to do at the Grand Canyon?" she asked after a while. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I'll find out when I get there. Can I ask you something? Tell me. Can I come with you?" Charlotte's question hung in the air like a musical note seeking its resolution. I looked at my daughter, with her puffy eyes and her newly discovered vulnerability, and for the first time in our adult relationship, I didn't feel the automatic need to rescue her. "Why do you want to come with me?" I asked her. Because I need time to think. Away from Brandon, away from his parents, away from all the pressure to pretend I have a perfect marriage. And do you think I'm the right person to accompany you on that? I think you're the only person who will tell me the truth, even if it hurts. I smiled. Maybe my daughter had learned something after all. All right, but on one condition. Anything. This trip is not to fix your marriage. It's not for me to advise you on what to do with Brandon. It's for both of us to learn to be okay with ourselves, without depending on the approval of others. I accept. The next morning, we took the train to Chicago and flew out to Phoenix, Arizona, the closest airport to the Grand Canyon. Charlotte had packed a small bag and silenced her phone after texting Brandon that she needed a few days to think. During the travel day, we talked about things we hadn't talked about in years. Her childhood memories, my truncated dreams, the decisions we had both made out of fear instead of conviction. The Grand Canyon welcomed us with its golden light and its immense, awe-inspiring scale, which seemed designed to force you to slow down. We stayed at a small lodge near the south rim, with separate rooms that allowed us to be together without suffocating each other. The first day, we visited Mather Point. As we walked along the trails, Charlotte told me things I didn't know about her marriage. How Brandon had convinced her that she was too sensitive, too demanding, too dramatic. How she had learned to minimize her own feelings to maintain the peace. "That sounds familiar," I told her as we sat on a bench overlooking the canyon, watching the layers of rock stretch out before us. "Did the same thing happen to you with Dad?" "Something like that. Your dad taught me that my emotions were inconvenient, that my needs were selfish, that my pain was exaggerated. I got so used to seeing myself through his eyes that I lost the ability to trust my own perspective." How did you get out of it?" "I'm still getting out," I admitted, but it started when I stopped asking him for permission to feel what I was feeling. That evening, we ate at a small diner where an older waitress served us hearty comfort food that tasted like generations of women who had perfected the recipe. Charlotte talked about her work at the hospital, how much she loved medicine, and the career plans she had set aside when Brandon suggested that maybe it was time to think about starting a family. "Do you want children?" I asked her. "I don't know. Before, I thought I did, but now I realize maybe I wanted it because I was supposed to want it, like the marriage. You have time to decide. You're 32, not 80. Do you regret having us?" The question surprised me with its honesty. "I don't regret you. I regret having lost myself in the process of being your mother. I regret having believed that loving meant disappearing." The second day, we visited a local Native American art market. Charlotte bought a brightly colored woven scarf that contrasted beautifully with her skin. I bought a silver necklace I didn't need but wanted, simply because I liked it. It had been years since I bought something just because it gave me pleasure. "Mom," she said as we had lunch at a park picnic table, "what are you going to do when we go back to Boston?" "I'm going to continue living my life. I'm going to travel more. Maybe take a class in something I've always wanted to learn. Maybe adopt a dog." "What about us?" "Ethan and me. You will continue to be my children, but you will no longer be my life project, nor my financial responsibility, nor my source of validation." "Does that mean you won't help us anymore?" "It means that when I help you, it will be because I choose to, not because I feel obligated. And you'll have to learn to solve your problems without expecting me to show up with my checkbook or my sacrifices to bail you out." Charlotte nodded slowly, as if processing a completely new concept. On the third day, While visiting a scenic overlook, I received a call from Ethan. For the first time in weeks, I decided to answer. Mom, where are you? Charlotte won't tell me anything and you haven't answered my texts. I'm in Arizona on vacation. On vacation? By yourself? With your sister? There was a silence. He probably didn't expect that answer. Hey, Mom, I need to talk to you. The condo I told you about. The owner is pressuring me for the down payment. If I don't give it to him next week, he's going to sell it to someone else. And? Well, I need the money. The $40,000 I asked for. Ethan, I already told you I don't have that money, but you can get it. You can take out a home equity loan on your apartment. Or sell something. Or talk to Brandon's grandfather. He has money. The same old logic. My life, my assets, my contacts existed to solve his problems. Ethan, honey, listen to me because I won't repeat it. I will not mortgage my apartment to finance your projects. I will not sell my few possessions so you can buy property. I will not beg for money from strangers to solve your lack of financial planning. But Mom, it's my future. It's your future exactly. Your responsibility. Your problem. Your solution. I can't believe how selfish you've become. What happened to you? You always supported us before. Before, I confused draining my resources with showing love. Now I've learned the difference. I hung up the phone and looked out at the ancient rock formations in front of us. Millions of years of existence, adapting to change, surviving droughts and storms, growing slowly but with determination. Are you okay? Charlotte asked me. I'm perfect. That night, our last one near the canyon, we walked along the quiet village streets while a nearby lounge played soft music. The air smelled of pine and crisp, cool air. Mom, Charlotte said as we sat on a park bench, I think I'm going to leave Brandon. Are you sure? I'm sure I don't want to be married to someone who sees me as a convenient option while his heart is somewhere else. And what are you going to do? I'm going back to work full-time. I'm going to look for my own apartment. I'm going to learn to be alone without feeling incomplete. That sounds like an excellent decision. Are you going to support me? I will support you emotionally, but financially, you'll have to figure it out on your own. I understand. Do you really understand? I understand that you raised me to be independent, but I chose to be dependent because it was easier. I understand that the money you spent on us cost you opportunities you never got back. I understand that your love was priceless, but we put a price tag on it. My eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief. My daughter finally understood. We returned to Boston on the Sunday afternoon train. During the trip, Charlotte showed me photos she had taken. Us smiling near the overlooks, eating dinner at the diner, buying flowers at the market. They were the first photos where we looked genuinely happy together in years. 6 months later, I am writing this from my South End apartment. Charlotte divorced Brandon after discovering he had emptied their joint savings account to finance a trip to Europe with Sabrina. She now lives in a small apartment near the hospital where she works and is studying for a cardiology fellowship she always wanted to do. Ethan finally got a stable job at a consulting firm after realizing no bank would lend him money without a solid credit history. He still calls me occasionally for advice, but no longer to ask for money. Richard married Brenda last month. I wasn't invited, and I didn't care. I adopted a dog. His name is Diego, like the artist, and he likes to join me on my morning walks through the Boston Common. I also enrolled in a photography class and am planning my next trip, this time to the California coast. I learned that true love is not measured in sacrifices, but in respect. That being a good mother does not mean disappearing as a woman. That being 67 years old does not mean my life is over. It means it is finally beginning. Have you ever experienced anything similar to my story? Do you know someone who confused loving with disappearing? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Maybe these words will reach someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to start loving yourself.